Welcome, Shane. Are we recording, Paula?
Paula, you're on mute.
Mary, we are recording. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. This is the city of Cottonwood Heights. It's 5 p.m. It's Tuesday, May 5th, 2020. This is the city's work session. And of course, we're being recorded, so appreciate everyone's attendance. We have a couple of guests with us tonight. First, we have the Executive Director, Mr. Scott Ruff from Beck, and we have Mr. Ralph Becker, or better known as Mayor Becker, from Central Wasatch Commission, who both have some general business item, not business item, but some informational items to share with us. So Tim, we'll turn over to you to introduce Mr. Ruff. I understand he's from New Jersey. We won't hold that against him. We like people from New Jersey. Right, Christine?
Yeah, I'll just mention a few things. I appreciate Scott being here. He started at the end of January, I believe January 27th, in his new position here. He came from New Jersey. It was the Mountain Valley Emergency Communications Center, I believe, was where he had worked prior to that. He was executive director there, as well as director for another emergency communications center in Kansas, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we're excited to have him here with us. I wanted to introduce him and then also have him share a little bit about what's happening with Beck and other things.
Welcome, Mr. Ruff. We'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Taney, Council. Appreciate the time, and I'm not offended by the New Jersey comment since I grew up on Long Island, New York, so I'm a New Yorker. But like Mr. Taney said, I have a vast career. I've started my career on Long Island and bounced back and forth across the country, from to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Washington State, to Kansas, and then back to New Jersey. So I have a vast knowledge and experience in all levels of public safety and emergency communications, specifically since I was a cadet when I was in my late teens. So I was happy for the opportunity here. And like Mr. Tingy said, we have a lot to work on, and I'm looking forward to taking those steps forward to get us where I think you all expect the service levels to be, our public safety agencies, police departments, fire rescue, the communities, and in of itself to enhance the services in those levels moving forward. So really quickly, I'll give you a high-level view. I enjoy questions more than I do like talking about myself, but like Mr. Tingy said, I got here, actually started 2 weeks early. I was supposed to start mid-February. I actually started January 27th. There was a lot going on with CAD projects and other administrative issues, UCA grants and things like that. So I kind of hit the ground running, got tied up in a lot of that administrative stuff and working out the final details for that to get that project back on track and towards the final implementation later this year. And at the same time, getting a quick dive into really what's going on at VEC and talking to the many chiefs, police, fire, EMS, city administrators, and the like to kind of get a handle on what some of the challenges are and what we need to do to move forward. In my short time here, I did a quick assessment, and we've already started to make some administrative changes. We're working on operational changes, again, to enhance the service levels that you expect, while addressing some of the fiscal challenges I inherited, moving forward and stabilizing the budget and try to level it out and build a foundation for us to move forward. Some of those changes took effect last week as far as administrative. We're making management changes, realigning our staff, re-engaging staff and offering opportunities, and building on training, career development, and things like that. And then we're also starting to engage our public safety partners in some of the challenges or frustrations they've experienced over the last few years as things were changing, whether it be the CAD project, new cities being formed in the Valley, people changing governance, whether it's in or out of UPD, UFA, new forms of city government, new police departments. This is a first for me that towns in Utah and cities just seem to get born in the last few years here. So, so making sure all the needs are met and expectations are clearly defined. So with that, I'm willing to answer any questions. I work closely with Chief Russo on a lot of things, and Mr. Tingey, I try to brief the Board of Trustees and be as transparent as possible. And that's one of my goals here is to offer that level of transparency and information where available. If I don't know the answer, we'll let you know I don't know the answer, but we'll get you some sort of clarity as quickly as possible. You might not like that clarity, but at least you'll have an answer and we'll be able to forge a path forward. So again, Mr. Mayor or Council, if there's any specific questions or areas.
Yeah, Mr. Ruff, thank you, and appreciate you joining us because VEC's very important to us. And also on the call today, we have our liaison to UFA, which is Riley Pilgrim, who works directly under Chief Peterson. And so you may have questions, and of course you mentioned Chief Russo. And welcome to Utah. We joke about New Jersey, but myself living in Buffalo for a while, outside Buffalo, I have some fond memories of New York. And Councilor Michael on our city council is it from New Jersey, Christine?
She's shaking her head, yeah.
Yes, I'm from New Jersey.
See, so it's a small world. But maybe you could share with us just quickly, we've heard some general feedback as to the fiscal challenges, and because those fiscal challenges, it's had an impact on our budget. Maybe you can tell us kind of how that's moving and how you plan to mitigate those concerns. The other issue we've heard is that because of some of the challenges you've inherited, that response times have been somewhat of a challenge, not a challenge, but they've been lengthened in time to respond. So maybe you could just give us a brief kind of explanation of how you're addressing those. And we're, again, glad to welcome you to Utah.
Well, thank you. Let me ask, let me deal with the second question or inquiry first regarding response times. Because Chief Russo has approached me a couple times with his concerns and your council's concerns about some of the response times, but they're not unique to Cottonwood Heights. And what I'm finding is I know some of the challenges, there were perceptions related to possibly the transition from CAD systems, transitions of the formation of new police departments and whatnot. And what I think, and I've expressed this to Chief Russo, I've expressed this to my Board of Trustees, as well as the 3 other cities where you kind of fall into this, I don't want to say no man's land, but this kind of gray area. And it's one of the challenges I've been dealing with in my short time here is, as you know, we're in the middle of a CAD project. So we had a group of cities, which was on one CAD platform. UPD came over and they're on another CAD platform, which is computer-aided dispatch. It's a system we use to process calls and dispatch police, fire, and EMS. And early in the project, your city, Cottonwood Heights, the city of Draper, Harriman, and Riverton, all to get the project going, had stepped up and asked the board and were supported by the Board of Trustees to move forward as a group before everybody else to kind of maybe work out some of the bugs logistically and things like that to the new CAD platform. And some of those decisions were administrative, some were fiscal, many of them were operational with the, again, the oversight, maybe the transition out of UPD. And I apologize, I don't know all the timing on some of those decisions and formations of departments and things like that. But that's what I was led to believe fell into all those decisions. So when that decision was made, and this is my assessment of what had happened, is those 4 agencies, while moved to the new platform, no longer fell under the side of VEC, which was the old or existing, the phased out platform of what's called Spillman Technologies. They went to Versaterm, and then the Unified Police, which was on Versaterm, and that's where all the dispatchers on that platform were trained and were efficient and using that technology. what I've surmised is, and I've talked to the chiefs, the 4 police chiefs about this just a couple of weeks ago, was, and I don't want to pick on my predecessors. What's done is done. We just need to move forward. But there wasn't a good transition plan, in my opinion, of, okay, when this decision was made and we implemented these changes, how are we going to deal with these 4 agencies? So what I believe had happened was because it was the unified police side of the house, they were the trained personnel, their expertise on the technology, there was limited or minimal engagement with the 4 police chiefs that moved to that platform for operational reasons. And by default, some of the unified police communications policies kind of got layered on top of your city and the 3 other cities that transferred. And what this created was no one knew where to go, because people pay, and this kind of segues into the next topic, but the way the assessments are done, they pay for resources and services provided by VEC. So your 4 cities weren't under UPD, but they weren't under the Spillman, and there was an officer safety, public safety issue of mixing radio channels with computer technologies. So that created more service needs on their primary channels and things like that. But there were policies built in, and I apologize, I talk fast, so feel free to yell and stop me if you need clarification. But there were policies built in on the unified police side, operational decisions that they have made that allowed for the managing of calls by the dispatch center based on activity within their jurisdiction. And like I said, some of those policies were, they weren't maliciously done. They were layered on top, and you fell into this pot. So if calls were being held for a certain amount of time based on priority or call information, that was creating the delays in the response times or calls for service for your jurisdiction, where you might have officers available, but because it falls into this bucket for UPD, the dispatcher just fell into their old ways and said, oh, I can sit on that for 2, 3, 4 minutes, instead of just straight out dispatching it to available resources, which is my understanding of what the chiefs want, and I agree with. And that just wasn't handled well. So as we found that out, we began cross-training, and I'm trying to engage the chiefs and the police users on standardizing some of the call-taking processes, our dispatch protocols, what the expectation of the officers were, and that should, by in and of itself, fix the efficiencies and the response times for those other agencies, not only Cottonwood Heights, but for all agencies, police and fire, EMS. But it's going to take a little time because we're still in a little transition. But in some of the reports I ran, and then the reason I'm comfortable making that assessment is the call to dispatcher. So from the time the call taker picks up and I'm looking about 911 calls, from the time the dispatcher picks up that call, takes the information, enters it into CAD to be dispatched, it was well within the parameters based on the call priorities. So anywhere from 30 seconds to 1:30 to no more than 2 minutes, depending on the priority. And then it could get hung up, or I'm finding they were getting hung up from the dispatch, from the call to actual dispatch time is where I saw the lag times. So once we identified that, we began to engage and figure out how we can expedite and make this more efficient. And
well, Scott, I mean, thank you for that detailed explanation. We appreciate that, and obviously from reports from Tim is that, and he speaks very highly of the efforts, and that's why we've changed our representation on VEC, where we have our city manager there as well to represent our needs as well as with the chief. And so we appreciate that. And so can you just, I don't want to take a lot of time, but maybe you can tell us kind of what the time frame is when you think those response times will be back into what we've had in the past? Is that months? Is it weeks? Is it?
Well, I'm hesitant to give a hard, fast date because they always seem to bite me. Yeah. But I can tell you the project's moving forward. We worked through all the logistics. The whole issue with the grant and the UCA was settled last month. We're in possession of the funds. We have a timeline and a plan moving forward. We did finish the cross training for call takers and people on both sides of the room here so Spillman and Versaterm, those are the two current systems. And then at our trustee board meeting this month, they'll finalize, I hope, the amendments in the contracts to move forward. And the plan is through, we're going into summer, and I mean, this COVID pandemic has kind of thrown things a little sideways, but we're on track to move fire rescue by the end of summer and then start phasing in the police departments. So I would say it's going to take at least, we'll start to see efficiencies and in slight improvements over the, monthly moving forward. But until we're fully on one platform, which is between the end of this year, early next year, with all agencies. But I can say, and I'll defer to Chief Russo and the other chiefs if they want to comment, we are also actively looking at reallocating radio resources and how we manage those channels. So logistically, if we can partner together, and this is a chief's decision, this is not a VEC thing, I don't meddle in their operations, I'll just deliver what they want, is if we get like agencies and partner agencies that border each other, have similar geographic boundaries, and provide backup and support for each other, we'll begin to see those efficiencies because with the standardization of protocols and those geographic boundaries and logistics will make things more efficient in the sense that we'll be able to have overlap and automatically provide the support services and responses to your jurisdictions. And borders, while they exist, will become more fluid between the police and fire EMS agencies in how we manage calls and get help to your jurisdiction. So I think you'll gradually see month to month, month over month improvements. And then eventually when this full implementation, which is probably within the next year, you'll greatly see significant improvements to your level of service and response times.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take a lot more time, but I want to give the council an opportunity to ask further questions. But the second part of my original question was the fiscal challenges you have. So the increases to the members, is that kind of a one-time bump? Are you comfortable going forward with the budget, or do you see challenges yet to be determined fiscally?
So I think there may be some challenges ahead, but I don't think they'll be catastrophic or drastic. So first dive into this, and when I first approached the board, there's a lot of things that I didn't understand. And what I mean I didn't understand is I couldn't follow the logic behind the administration of the budget. And I've said this in other public meetings, and I don't like to pick on my predecessor, but it was, it wasn't managed in the best, in my opinion, in my doing municipal and government type and interlocal type organization budgets. And there appeared to be a lot of, they wanted to show the board of, we want to maintain 0% increases. We want to do this and that and do these projects and not provide assessments and increases to the detriment of the organization. And that lack of transparency, I believe, has fed into our fiscal situation, in the sense there was a lot of implied authority in my office by previous administrations, and a lot of things were done that were either under the umbrella or of the authority of the director's office, or what I found a lot of, it was discussed at the trustee meeting, but there was no action. But because it was discussed at the trustee meeting, I had the authority to go. They can't tell me they didn't know about it. And that created some challenges in projects, and the use of fund balances to cover cash flow problems and supplement certain programs on fire EMS or some police programs, which created the hole for us. And there was this implication that it was the reason UPD came over and they threw the budget into a tizzy and it cost so much money. I don't find that to be true. Did it impact the budget in the sense that it increased the operating costs? Yes, but they also came over with a budget that was manipulated either for political reasons or by the previous director, or to make the numbers work. So I'm sorry.
No. I just watching the agenda here, not take too long, and I appreciate your frankness, and I want to give an opportunity for either Chief Riley Pilgrim or Chief Russo to comment, and anyone else on the council who might have a question for Mr. Ruff?
Well, I had a quick one. Are you in the process of hiring a finance director, or have you already done that?
Yeah, so at last month's meeting, the board finalized the approval. I terminated the HR manager and his position, and we're going to hire a deputy director of administration and finance. That position approved to hire immediately. It's been posted on the Utah Towns and Cities, the Utah Government Finance Officers Association. So we have about 4 or 5 really impressive resumes and candidates from actually in the Valley here. So at our May 20th board meeting, I'm going to present not the application so much that we have, I think, a good pool, have the board kind of help outline a process. And then I'm going to engage some of the board members, some of your agencies or your jurisdictions and your finance folks to help sit on that search committee to do the interviews and the process to get somebody in-house and get control of our finances, because we're very weak on a lot of that area. So yes, that was a long-winded answer to, it's been approved, been posted, and we're soliciting and reviewing applications as we speak.
Well, that's good news. It's been years and years we've been thinking that that's been necessary. That should help. The other question was, out in the area where the dispatchers are, did you have to do a lot of physical changes to keep the separations? They have big workstations, but have you had any outbreaks, or any of the employees have to quarantine because of the COVID-19?
I'm knocking on wood right now, but thank goodness we haven't had any positive COVID diagnoses here. We are following the CDC, Department of Health, and County OEM and Health Department guidelines. We are, because of the way the room is set, if you've been here, the workstations in them by themselves create enough of social distancing within the center. But we haven't stopped our training and things like that. We're taking all the necessary precautions of cleaning. If people are symptomatic, we received one-time funds from UCA for the pandemic. We are giving them paid admin leave so they can get tested, and then held out for 3 to 5 days with pay and before they return. So thank goodness we haven't been impacted. Everyone's been coming to work for the most part, and we've been addressing everything on a case-by-case basis. And we've purchased masks and other PPEs and things like that as necessary. So we've been very fortunate.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have a comment? Chief Russo, Chief Pilgrim, any comments with respect to the discussion?
I'll just tell you that Mr. Ruff has been placed in a very difficult position because that entity had many problems. Some of them went on for a lot of years, and he had to go in there and do the dirty work, some of which should have been handled by other administrators, both there and at other police departments from where employees came. And that's the hard part of the job, and no one likes to do it, but it was a necessary evil that had to be done. And sometimes you have to do those things to make the organization survive and make it stronger. And he did that, and already we are seeing changes. I think he's going to be a great addition. We're so proud and pleased to have him there. He is correct. Some of the things that you've seen were carried over, and he just is doing his best to merge all the different agencies. And once I can get this us and them, UPD, and all the rest of you guys broken up so that we can have dispatch channels with contiguous agencies, that'll be much better. Right now we share with Draper. That does nothing for either of us when we should be sharing with Midvale or Holiday or Mill Creek. But I just can't get those UPD agencies to have that understanding yet, but we will. And I appreciate all he's done. So I'll sign off now.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. Chief Pilgrim, any comments?
Yeah, just real brief. I do want to go back to just the call processing component. We've experienced something similar on the fire side, just timeliness, sometimes a lack thereof with call processing. But over the year, I know I'd speak to the last year, we've made a lot of progress. We've since Scott's been here, but even before that, just identifying those issues and sharing that with dispatch. I personally have always thought they've been extremely responsive, and that's probably not and not prior to Scott, even without the admin, the dispatchers themselves and the supervisors were doing a really amazing job. Similar to what we went through as an organization, they really, I think, do their best to make sure things are operating. And so to his credit too, I feel like they've been extremely responsive. And I do know if we have these issues and challenges and we bring them to them, we're always getting, they're always being addressed. It may not be immediate, but we're seeing results. So I think we're on the right track, and definitely commend him for what he's been doing. It's definitely not an easy position that he was placed in. So, but yeah, we've seen some drastic improvements as well. So
Good. Thank you. And those reports we've been getting from our city manager, so we appreciate those efforts. Any further comments, questions from the council? It's about 5:30. Scott, we won't make you stay around unless you'd like to. You're welcome to go and be with your family or whatever you like to do tonight. But thank you for joining us, and we'll invite you back again maybe in several months to see how things have come together for you. So again, welcome to Utah, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Have a safe, be safe, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. All right, referring back to your agenda, item number 2 is the Central Wasatch Commission ILA modification discussion. In our business meeting tonight, we have an action item to modify our interlocal agreement. As I think everyone's aware, is that we have a new town. I don't think it's officially a city, but the town of Brighton, which was incorporated, and like the town of Alta, they petitioned to become a member of the CWC. The voting members of CWC are supportive of that. Plus, the CWC has accepted the resignation as a formal member of the Utah Department of Transportation director. But at the same time, the CWC feels it's critical that we have the involvement of UTA and UDOT and Metropolitan Water. And so the compromise, where they're not elected officials, is to have them come in possibly as ex officio members. And so we have Ralph Becker with us tonight, who's the executive director, maybe just to kind of summarize that and let me know what I've left out and answer any questions that the council might have as we entertain that as an action item later on today. Hopefully it's more of a house cleaning keeping type thing and we're required to do it. And Shane, from a legal perspective, you might be able to respond as well. So Mr. Becker, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mayor Peterson. Good to see you, council members, again. And I'll just note that Shane Topham represents both Cottonwood Heights and Central Wasatch Commission, so he can probably answer some of these questions if you have some better than I can. As Mayor Peterson said, what sort of immediately prompted a change in the interlocal agreement for the Central Wasatch Commission was the town of Brighton becoming incorporated, and their desire and the commission's desire to have them become members, as are really all of the jurisdictions that are either in or immediately proximate to this part of the Wasatch Mountains. So with that, there's, as Mayor Peterson indicated, we also wanted to address the issue of members who aren't elected officials. All of the members of the Central Wasatch Commission are elected officials. But to be able to provide for public officials who aren't elected officials to be part of the active discussion as part of the Central Wasatch Commission. So there was a lot of deliberation, but the commission settled on providing for up to 4 ex officio members to be added to the commission's membership. I should tell you that Mayor Peterson is more than carrying his load as the representative of Cottonwood Heights. Our biggest initiative this year is seeing if we can find a mountain transportation system that would work for these mountains by consensus. And Mayor Peterson is chairing that committee as well as being an officer of the commission. So with that, I'll just maybe open up for any questions, unless Shane, if you want to add something, certainly welcome that.
I guess that I would just explain that the original interlocal agreement provided for member entities, but it also provided for and each member entity is entitled to appoint one of its elected officials to serve on the CWC's governing body, which is its Board of Commissioners. But the interlocal agreement also provided for 2 appointed commissioners, which do not represent a member of the CWC. Instead, one of these appointed commissioners was to represent the interests of UDOT, and the other was to represent the interests of the Wasatch Back. So I won't go into all of the ins and outs of how this Wasatch Back issue played out, except to say that ultimately Park City joined the CWC as a member entity in its own right, and the Wasatch Back seat was then represented by Summit County. The problem we had, or the issue that we had, was that as to the UDOT seat, Carlos Braceras, the executive director of UDOT, was took on a appointed commissioner role and sat on the board for a year and a half or so. But I think I have heard at least that he ultimately got uncomfortable being the only unelected officer sitting on the CWC board. So he withdrew. The state has declined to appoint a replacement. So we were left with a situation where the ILA said that we had to have someone representing the interests of UDOT, and yet UDOT wouldn't appoint someone to represent their interests. So that is the main reason that we are amending the ILA, is to get rid of those appointed commissioner positions, and instead, as Mike and Ralph have explained, have up to 4 ex officio members who are non-voting members of the board. They are appointed for a year or 2. I forget what we came up with. They can be reappointed, but I think the feeling is that will allow the CWC board to bring in expertise and additional voices when they have a particular issue they're focusing on. And so the resolution that's before the Cottonwood Heights Council tonight will not only approve that ILA amendment, but also will, as a separate issue, as explained by the mayor and Ralph, add Brighton, town of Brighton, as a member in its own right in the CWC. Both of those actions, approval of the ILA amendment and addition of Brighton as a member in its own right, have been unanimously approved by the CWC board, but now have to be approved by the governing bodies of all of the member entities, which is why it's before this council tonight.
Okay, thank you, Ralph and Shane, for the detailed explanation. And any questions, concerns from the council? It's there's not a fiscal note tied to this. It just kind of cleans it up a little bit as the CWC is still evolving and getting more defined as it moves forward, both in its long-term vision and as well as its action items. And even just last night, I think I explained to Christine, I thought I'd share with you tonight, it had a short small project review process where it took applications and reviewed a bunch of small projects and funded some of those. One of the projects chosen to be funded last night was $20,000 to the property acquisition on Wasatch, and that will be part of a challenge grant, and hopefully that'll be matched. So there's some things like that that are very positive. Plus, being the city between the canyons, one of our biggest concerns, of course, is the transportation component, especially with Wasatch Boulevard and the EIS and any type of overall system that's proposed in the future. So having us heavily involved and having a seat at the table, I think, is important. So I think we're supportive of it, and we'll just keep working hard. So again, any questions from the council on any aspect of CWC and this action item for tonight? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Ralph, thank you for joining us, and we won't make you stay around because you're doing a lot of these. I know you've already been to about every city in the valley, at least those on CWC. So have a good night.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is the review of the business meeting agenda. Of course, we'll begin with a welcome and pledge. We'll either use the picture of Riley Pilgrim, his flag, or the one you can see behind me when we say the pledge in a few moments. We'll have citizen comments. Those will be comments that have been submitted in writing before 5 o'clock. We'll have our standing quarterly report from our police department, and we'll be able to see the impact of some of those response times that we have referred to in tonight's discussion. We have 3 action items. The first one, and we'll take just a moment and talk about that right now. It's approving reappointments to the Architecture Review Commission. I think we have 4 appointments as members, and 1 is an alternate. And then we, of course, have 2 that are continuing, if that's right. So, Mike, you want to address that real quickly? And I know that there were some questions last week regarding these appointments. But Mike, I'll turn it over to you, or Matt.
Yep, I'm happy to talk about it for a second. With your council, the city council packet this previous week, and I believe with the council communications as well, we collected fairly detailed resumes of each of the 4 members up for renewal. Those have been provided to you. I guess I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about those.
Just a comment. I was glad to see a landscape architect on there. So I personally appreciated Mr. Peters' resume. I thought that was valuable. Comments, questions from anyone regarding the?
I guess I had one question. I noticed one of the board members is a real estate agent. Can you just help me understand how a real estate agent, like what attributes they bring to the group?
Sure. I could give you my own opinion, but I think the ordinance says the members of the commission should be made up of people representing various industries, including architecture, landscape architecture, planning, development, and real estate is one of those. Outside of, he does fill that requirement that's in the ordinance. I don't believe we have any other just dedicated realtors on the commission. I just think the process of going through entitlements and this kind of development review, site plan and design process, I do think, I don't think you'd want an overwhelming contingent of the commission being made up of realtors, because a lot of the expertise should be in architecture and site design. But having 1 or 2 representatives that understand real estate on the commission, I believe, is helpful.
I believe there's also a spot on that commission for someone who just lives in the gateway zone or something like that and might have a local interest, to give. I think that's probably useful for perspective if we got an applicant like that.
Yeah, thanks. There is. And one thing I'll state is Stephen Harmon, he is up for renewal. He's our alternate member. He will only be on the commission a couple more months. And then he will be leaving the country for an extended period of time. So his spot will become vacant. And to Scott Bracken's point, I think what we'll try to do there is find a member of the business association or another business owner that lives in that gateway zone in the city, and try to find someone from that kind of group of people to serve on the commission, because that is the one kind of area it recommends that we don't have on the commission right now.
Mike, can you tell me what the subject line was in the email with the bios, or was it an attachment in a different email? Because I'm not sure I got it.
I believe it was in the council communications, and I know it was in the city council agenda packet that was sent out.
It's in our council packet. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in the memo that Mike provided. It's in the content of all of their resumes is in the memo that he provided. So it's on the second, or let me see, it's on the second and third pages of his memo, which has all of their detailed biographical information.
Yeah, after the tree ordinance. Yeah.
Maybe Tim or Mike, when you're at the next meeting, express appreciation to them for going to the, I know some of them hadn't created resumes or anything like that for years and years and years, and that was extra effort on them, on their part, to provide us with the information, but it's much appreciated.
I actually think it's a good idea to ask them those things, to know that we don't rubber stamp things, that we do have questions and we do have interest in their background and their skill set. So I think that's good communication with them, and knowing several of them myself, I feel comfortable and having them provide that information. I think it actually gives credibility to the relationship between the council and the ARC. So I think it's good.
When you are evaluating these in the future, you will have all of that information on every committee that you, from here on out, will see you'll see the resumes and that for ones that you're considering.
Thank you. It's a good standard to have. Any further questions, comments moving forward? Okay, the next item on our business meeting tonight is adopting of a tentative budget. And again, I want to emphasize it's a tentative budget. I still think there are some questions in the budget, and the plan is later on this month, probably in our next work session, is to have the budget on the work session again to talk about a few tweaks or pieces of the budget where we have additional information that might impact that. So tonight is strictly a tentative budget, and Scott, do you want to maybe quickly let us know what you're presenting tonight?
Yes, Mayor and Council. So the tentative budget that's being presented tonight is basically the culmination of the efforts of staff, plus the input that we received from the Budget Committee and the Compensation Committee, as well as the last, I believe it's last 2 weeks that we've met and talked about different aspects of things that we were considering, different questions that we had as we talked to you. And not that we voted on things, but that we kind of sought a little consensus on certain items as we progressed through the development of the tentative budget. But I don't know if you want more details than that, but that's what we've kind of got there.
Mayor, may I also add something?
Please.
So tonight, and you're probably aware of this, but just if the public is watching, tonight you're considering the resolution that will adopt the tentative budget, and it will set a time for inspection of that budget, which will be basically from tonight until you consider adoption, which is on June 16th. It also sets the time and place for a public hearing, which we have set in the resolution as well, which is June 16th, and also the newspaper notification or publication elements of this. So the resolution that you're considering tonight is that, adopting the tentative budget with that time frame for the public to evaluate, and then you to hold a public hearing and set a time for adoption of the budget. As you mentioned, Mayor, we will have it on the work session in upcoming meetings. There's opportunity to make modifications at this point through this process, especially as we receive public input as well. But I just want to make sure you understood that process.
I appreciate you raising that point of the public hearing. How will we have a public hearing, and how will that be managed with the parameters we have set for us based upon the COVID-19? Will it all be online, or will it all be written?
Yes. Yeah, so we'll have the budget will be available online so people can review it. We'll also have copies here at City Hall if someone wants a copy or if they request information on it. So that will be, it's accessible for people to review. And then we will have the public hearing, we'll set it, but it will most likely be in a remote meeting on the 16th. It's hard to say, but I'm anticipating that if we are, we'll make sure people are aware that they have to provide comments prior to that meeting. and we'll read those into the meeting at the time. And so that's the process that we will go through. A little bit unique this year, but we still are allowing people opportunity to review it and give us their input over a month and roughly month and a half.
Yeah, Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, whether we're legally required to have a live meeting with live public comment at a physical location, or can continue with remote meetings and take the written public comment up to the meeting start time, is going to depend on whether the governor's March 18th order that suspended certain portions of the Open and Public Meetings Act still is in effect at that time. So I think that it will be, but we'll see what happens as we get closer to the date.
Okay, but that'll be something to watch because we want to ensure that the public has that opportunity. Any questions on the budget process, the timing, or the tentative budget is being presented tonight? Comments, questions?
No, I'll just reiterate that with the situation that we're in and not the ability to do any open houses or anything like that, the extra time, giving the public the maximum amount of time to go through the document, I think is worthwhile.
Thank you. And there's one thing I'm going to bring up just as an information item, because it was a lot of our conversation last week, and that is with the effort of the council with staff and meeting with Wasatch Front Regional Council and UDOT. There is some promise, and I don't know if, Tim, we could take just a minute, and that may be something we'll be talking about in a month. There's promise that the CMAQ money for that capital project on Wasatch might be something we'll be able to consider prior to adopting a formal budget. I think where we have just a minute, if maybe you could update us where that is. I think that's important.
Okay, I will start, and then Matt, if he has, Matt Shipp has information as well. We are in the process of negotiating with them on some modifications to our CMAQ grant. What it would do, and I included this in your council communication, is it would reduce the amount of parking stalls that we originally had approved with the CMAQ funds. It would basically reduce it down to half of what was originally proposed and we received a grant on. And then they would reduce the funding, but it would provide funding to build 65 parking stalls at a minimum. The stormwater, the parking area, we've included the bathroom facility in this, and there would be a requirement, because it's CMAQ funds, for a bus turnout at that site as well. We have some conversations we need to have with UDOT and with UTA on this, but right now we are in the process of submitting a letter for this modification. They would take it to an executive committee and make a determination. We don't know the timing on that. Matt, why don't you add anything that I missed on that?
Matt, you look too comfortable. You may have to wake up.
I'm here, Mayor. I've been keeping up. I think Tim covered a lot of it. I've been kind of going back and forth with Wasatch Front Regional Council on this. I think we're getting close to being able to keep the CMAQ money and, like Tim said, build the parking area at a very reduced amount. And they have been gracious enough to allow us to keep the restroom in there. It is a process, though. It's a little back and forth going on right now. I'm finalizing some construction numbers right now. The numbers that we saw, or that you were looking at for the last couple of weeks, are based on some, well, CMAQ is federal money, so you have certain processes you have to follow with that money.
Much more expensive.
So the numbers were a little bit different. So Adam and I have been working on this for the past couple of days. So we should have the numbers finalized. I've got a call tomorrow with Wasatch Front to talk to them about the funding. And at that point, we're working on making this happen as quickly as possible, and so that we can get that parking area done, hopefully by next year, about summertime. And once again, it's a long process when you're dealing with the federal funds. There are a few things we still have to cover on our pricing. We have to cover our 6.77%, plus we have to cover an environmental study on the property itself. But we feel like we've got those things covered with the numbers that we have in the budget.
All right, thank you for that update. I think that's good news with the challenge we faced last week in our budget, and realizing that we may not have an answer by the time we adopt a formal budget, but I think we'll be able to make budget adjustments going forward with that news when it becomes to fruition. All right, any other comments, discussion on the action item of the tentative budget? The other item.
Real quick, Mayor, I just wanted
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell Scott Jurgis, thank you for an attempt at the apples to apples comparison. I think whatever industry you're in, government or otherwise, it's great to be able to compare yourself with not, you wouldn't call it your competitors in the governmental sector, but your neighboring cities. And I think if we could get a better and better comparison each year, that apples to apples really gives us a good idea of how we're doing comparatively with our neighbors. So thank you, Scott.
Yeah, Tally, thank you for bringing that up. I was actually impressed how much you got done. I expect to see just a few departments, but I appreciate that work. It was very interesting. I always like to see the park side of as well as the public safety and public works. So hopefully we can continue to maintain that as a standard, something that we have to give us another filter to look at our budget process.
And I would add maybe further and further attempts at transparency, because it really, really helps for the public to know where every single dollar that they are investing ends up.
Okay. All right, thank you. Another action item is the Central Wasatch Commission amendment to the interlocal agreement. Again, the main thing is allowing Brighton to become a member, because the current interlocal requires that every existing member has to approve them coming in. So it's a formality, as well as the change with respect to ex officio members as a result of UDOT leaving, as is explained by Shane and Ralph Becker. Any questions on that? Okay, well, that's the business meeting tonight. Hopefully we have everybody through by 8 o'clock or so. Let's go back to our work session. And we have two staff reports. The first is the proposed tree ordinance that we've had one presentation in the past, but we have an updated draft. So Mike, are you doing that, or is Matt Taylor?
I'll just give a brief introduction, and I'll turn some time over to Matt to walk you through it. A couple meetings ago, we just introduced this ordinance to you, stated at that time it was still in the Planning Commission process. We are now through that process. So the Planning Commission has reviewed this in 3 different work sessions and 2 different business meetings with public hearing elements involved. And one of those public hearings was prior to the move to electronic meetings. We received 0 public comments throughout that process. However, the Planning Commission reviewed it. A lot of the commission members really thoughtfully spent some time with it, made good recommendations, provided good feedback to us. We have incorporated all of their feedback and their recommendations. And as of the last Planning Commission meeting, they unanimously recommended approval of this ordinance. Being a legislative item, it now comes to the City Council for formal consideration. I think our plan here tonight is to have Matt walk you through the details of the ordinance in a little more specificity than we got last time. But prior to the council taking action, we'd like to bring this back to the Open Space Committee, get a recommendation from them on this as well, make sure they've had a chance to review it. Matt has also been coordinating with Public Works and the police department just to make sure that anyone that would be involved in implementing or enforcing or assisting with this ordinance is able to provide their feedback. So with that, I will just turn some time over to Matt.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me see if I can share my screen. And see if this works.
There it is.
You see that, or did that disappear?
No, you got, it's up there, your purpose statement.
Okay. Is it full screen? You see all the...
We can see your presentation on the left as well.
Okay. Well, did it move screens?
I think you're good.
Okay.
We can see it pretty well.
We'll try this.
Yeah, there you go. That's better.
Okay. The purpose of the ordinance, we were requested to look at trees for the city's benefit. And the goals of the ordinance is to improve the health and quality of trees throughout the city and public property and within landscaping. The ordinance defines cities and the public's responsibilities, and it gives us provisions for the abatement of private trees, establishes provisions for the protection of public trees and existing on-site trees when development is proposed, and defines standards for park strip trees and park strip landscaping. I just want to walk you through some of the benefits from adopting a urban forest management program. Property values are I'm not going to read all this. I'm just going to quickly go through these slides. Property values are shown to increase. Beautification and community identity can be improved. Heat management, as far as urban heat islands from asphalt and buildings, can be reduced. Pedestrian activity and health can increase from the presence of trees, directly related to that heat management and comfortable walk, interesting walk as well. Interestingly enough, roadway longevity can be improved to somewhat, depending on the amount of tree canopy shading, and so this can have impacts on city budgets. We've already asked you, and you did adopt a dark sky ordinance, but this assists in preventing light and noise trespass. There's an interesting psychological effect when we plant trees. It narrows the space on the street and can help people slow down. Water quality can be improved. This relates somewhat also to how we manage the park strips around trees. Air quality also can be improved through trees, their absorption of carbon dioxide. This, as we took this on, we realized that trees are, especially the ones in the public realm, are mostly along the street, and the health of a tree has a direct correlation to what's being planted or put in the park strip. Again, I'll just very briefly go through these slides. Most of these pictures are actually from other cities in the valleys because I didn't want to necessarily embarrass anybody. But we'll see examples like this throughout the city. Common problems. This is certainly not a condition that anybody wants to see, is just weeds and rocks. We sometimes see citizens paving over the park strip, and which can eliminate the opportunity for trees, but sometimes they will pave around the tree. That's definitely a big no-no in tree health and preservation. Just a few other interesting examples. Even stamped concretes can look attractive, but if the goal is increasing the urban forest, this is not an approach that would help us in that. regard, as well as some other implications like stormwater management. Park strips are a great place for some of the stormwater that would end up in the gutter to be absorbed. We sometimes you see people just put down gravel, not necessarily a bad solution, but can sometimes not be aesthetically as pleasing as some communities desire. Rocks. These are increasingly getting better. Sometimes we see a combination of pervious pavement treatments, round landscaping. This is, although landscaped and with trees, this can start creating sight distance problems and hazard problems on the sidewalk. We also have an issue with clear view and visibility sometimes when the wrong type of tree is selected. Of course, you can appropriately landscape these park strips. This is one example from Cottonwood Heights on Dolphin Way, where you can see that the tree canopy actually does shade the street, and that does help with things like heat management and the aesthetics. This is not, I think this is actually a Murray, but you can see if you get sufficient tree canopy, you can greatly reduce the amount of asphalt being heated up with the sun. This also creates the conditions for slow down traffic and other benefits. Another example, this one from Salt Lake City. So what we want to do is, this ordinance hopes to have outcomes to preserve and increase tree coverage within the city, increase our sustainability goals and their accomplishment, enhance the environment, aesthetics, and character of the city. And we really want a city resident participation and partnership, though, as we do this. So another few provisions, establish a city forester role. This is not necessarily a new position. It's a position defined that right now, as the ordinance is written, that the community development director would appoint from most likely existing staff. Is really intended to provide a point person for tree issues within the city, somebody that's can be specifically called, and they have some background and education to help assist with that, as well as just coordinate city issues relative to trees. So not necessarily a budget expense there, but could evolve into a greater role or position if the city desired in the future and thought it was a good thing. There are some miscellaneous provisions in this code, adopting definitions, cleanup, consistency issues within Title 14. It does outline some city responsibilities, things that we're basically already doing for the most part. It provides some clarity in our ordinance about who cares for park strips and trees and what can be done to those trees. Some of the key provisions is how do we landscape these park strips and public spaces. We have standards in there. I'm going to show you some illustrations which will really cut to the point on that. So I'm not going to read these in detail. We do have two standards though, one for park strips that are over 4 feet and one that are under. Trees and landscaping are problematic in small park strips, and so we have a slightly different standard for small park strips. We also added a provision in site plan review to help preserve existing trees and undeveloped and properties slated for redevelopment. Currently drafted to empower the Architectural Review Commission to review the appropriateness of tree removal. It doesn't prohibit tree removal, but seeks to preserve quality trees that are beneficial to the city, and proposes a fee, and this might be debated, but for unauthorized tree development. There's no specific amount in the ordinance as it's drafted now, but something that could be considered. This is the quick design standards version. Meet Chloe and Zoe. They do everything identically except for they landscape their park strips differently. Chloe here, she prefers the traditional grass approach. Does with city guidelines though, she does need to plant trees 25 feet apart and keep vegetation and mulch within a 3-foot buffer around those trees for their health. Her sister Zoe though, she prefers a more progressive approach of xeriscaping and low water management. She'd like to minimize the impact she has, the storm drainage. And so you see this is sort of a permeable pavers and rocks and xeriscaping that allows a little something different. So the ordinance is designed to give flexibility. There's a top-down view of that. I can come back to any of these slides. What we're not after in this ordinance is that's strictly prohibited is just filling in the park strip with 100% asphalt, concrete, like stamped concrete. Some type of landscaping and trees are required, with one exception, and that's double frontage lots where somebody has to go around and travel a quarter mile to get to the park strip on the other side of their property. So with that, there is resources, not necessarily, well, the Jordan Valley Conservancy District has lots of resources on how to do this well. And we can, part of this, and something the Planning Commission feels strongly about, is that we help educate the public. And so we will be putting together a website to provide resources. One thing that was discussed a little bit is what are appropriate trees. There are different types of trees appropriate for different locations. This ordinance considers a tree list that the staff would maintain. It's not adopted by ordinance. It's malleable and adaptable to needs, but would recommend trees for certain types of situations and environments. And also lists a short list, maybe a dozen or so trees that are known problem trees that should be prohibited. So that's the ordinance in a nutshell. I'd be happy to come back to any questions and discussion on that.
Thank you, Matt. I read through the ordinance earlier today and I had 6 or 8 questions that I highlighted, but you answered all but one of those. But before I ask my question, I'll turn it over to the council for comments and questions, and I'll have one at the end as well. Thank you. Excellent presentation, very thorough.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. I've got a quick question for Matt and others. How do you regulate consistency? You know, I think the areas that look like they have consistency obviously are a wonderful benefit, but because you have individuals and everyone has their own ideas, like Zoe and Chloe, but they did look somewhat consistent, but I see a lot of inconsistency, and it's as varied as personalities.
Well, I think the intent of this ordinance is to achieve the goals while maintaining people's preferences. Most of these park strips and these trees are in the public right of way. In some ways, the trees become almost the public domain, and we have an interest in their protection, as we've outlined, and then their health and their growth. On the flip side, we've traditionally required adjacent property owners to maintain that. I think one reason that they're not part of the property is, you know, the city would like to maintain the ability to do things in that right of way, and there is a benefit that they don't own these park strips and that they are taxed less because they're, you know, we're using that area for public space. But the flip side, we have traditionally required them to maintain and take care of that space. And so trying to find the balance between that consistency, but also personal preference and flexibility is what I try to achieve in this ordinance. So some things like regular tree planting every 25 feet, or that tree, there has to be some degree of landscaping involved. maybe that addresses your goal, or well, your comment for consistency without being too overburdensome.
I think in a PUD, it's a lot easier, but when you get out into the general, especially in highly established areas that have been there for many years, in campaigning, I saw a lot of interesting. In fact, one of those photos was from one of my areas. And I think sometimes people get very creative,
yeah,
which is kind of an interesting dilemma sometimes, but they can get I guess there's enforcement is the other part, and maintenance. I mean, once the trees, like we've got ones on Highland Drive that became a problem with people with high profile vehicles on the just north of Dan's. And then of course the roots on certain trees get bad. So it's great to see the proposed kind of guidelines that would help people maybe plant something that would have a positive rather than a negative influence on it.
Thank you for that comment. And if I may add to that, part of the ordinance is designed to give zoning enforcement some definitions and tools to correct issues. You know, if you have a park strip full of weeds, you know, we define what weeds are. We now say you have to landscape it without weeds. Some of it also addresses hazardous trees. So if we have a problem tree, there's some tools in the ordinance, helps the city abate that and gives some clarity on how we abate that, and also establishes an appeals process. So we're trying to be balanced in this approach of achieving city goals, but helping the city do its job while respecting our residents and those that really are the contributors to the city.
I think it's a great proposal.
Question, Matt. The language addresses the subdivider. So does this only apply to new construction, new neighborhoods?
Yeah, no. So as far as trees and park strips go, sorry, without pulling out the ordinance, it applies. It's not retroactive. So if you have a situation that doesn't meet to the proposed standard, you'll be able to keep that standard. You won't have to be forced to upgrade it at this time. But if you do develop or redevelop the property, at that time when you get the building permit or get a site plan approved, you would need to bring it up to standard. That's the proposal. And then of course any future new development would be required to meet the standard.
I would like to throw it out there for the consideration of the council. We discussed once upon a time subsidizing rain barrels for the community, like our neighbors have done. And maybe we could do a tree subsidy program at some point down the road where people who would like to install these trees along their curbs, we could subsidize that and have a massive tree distribution out of the parking lot at City Hall.
Yeah, there are communities that have done that. I think some of them run their own power or agencies. There may be others that do it out of the general fund. So sometimes the power utility is the one funding that tree planting. I could do more research into communities that are doing that out of some other funding source though.
I do know that, I don't know if it was Select Health or someone, there's some other private organizations who like to sponsor trees within communities. I would suggest with respect to Tally's question is maybe throw that out to the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Committee and see if there's any connections there. I think it was Greg Reed who had some connections previously, but to see if there's some interest in providing trees. I mean, I was involved in a program years ago where they did small trees that they gave them to anyone who wanted them. So it's worth looking at. Yeah.
I'll look into this. Let's help.
Thank you, Mayor.
I might just jump in. I thought it was, wasn't it Ivory Homes that had some initiative of so many trees they wanted to? thought
Yeah.
that.
We partnered with them last year, and they helped us plant 25 trees at Mountain View Park last.
That's what it was. That's what I was thinking.
And I think Select Health was involved, and we can continue to build that partnership and identifying somebody in the city, whether it's planning staff or another role, that is that point person would be part of their duties to continue to build those relationships.
So a quick question, Matt. If a tree is in a park strip, who actually owns the tree? If the property is owned by the city, who actually owns the tree in the park strip?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's in the public right of way. I think I'm going to ultimately defer to Shane for the answer on that one. It's in the public right of way. Often, I think in a community like Cottonwood Heights, probably the private property owner there paid for it and installed it. In some other communities where they have a tree program, the city charges a fee at the time of building permit, and that fee pays for the installation of the tree. So in that case, I would think the city clearly owns it. It's a sort of a murky place in my mind, because even if the city did clearly own it, we still ask the adjacent property owner to maintain it. So,
okay.
But that's pretty traditional.
Yeah, Mayor, what I found, at least in my experience, it's owned by, if it's in the right of way, it's owned by the city. Typically, most ordinances require it's maintained by the adjacent property owner.
I agree.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Yeah, because yeah, and I think you answered my other question as far as about the legal non-conforming of most of these park strips. So I assume that again, this is only going forward, so it's not retroactive. So
yeah, and the ordinance will reference a aerial data set that is under our control. I haven't identified that yet. I'll work with Melissa Blue on that, so that if there is a question of whether something's non-conforming or not, we can refer back to that aerial photography to determine that.
but I for one, this is just a personal preference. I appreciate the limits of the impervious surfaces. So if someone is just going to, with this new ordinance, change just the park strip only, not do anything else with their property, and change it to putting in stamped concrete all the way through 100%, would this ordinance prohibit that?
Yes. Yeah, so anything going forward, they want to come in and concrete it or asphalt it, that would be prohibited. Now they could do like the ordinance allows for like a combination of landscaping and impervious pavements, like asphalt paver, not asphalt, sorry, brick pavers, or they could do that.
I guess I misunderstood. I was thinking that it only applied if people were remodeling or changing some overall structure of their residence stuff. So if somebody's doing the park strip only, nothing else, this would then apply.
It would. So if they're voluntarily saying, I'm going to do something different with my park strip, no building permits, no site plan, they would need to follow the standard.
Okay.
If they're redeveloping, they'll have, and they're non-conforming, they'll need to bring it up to standard.
Okay.
Required.
Matt, I've got a quick question. How many people actually even think to contact the city when they are going to make a change to that, to their personal parking strip?
It's hard to say. We do have people call us. They ask questions. What can I not do with this will help us, because we do get calls about trees and park strips on a regular basis. Will it capture everybody? I don't know. There's people just going to go out there and do it. And so if they create a problem, again, this gives some tools for zoning enforcement to maybe put a stop work order or for them to correct a problem. One thing the Planning Commission continually asks us to do is education. And so again, coming back to putting together a web page on our website, that's something we can do. And then the thought would also be to have maybe an annual spot in the city newsletter, just outlining a few key points that residents should be aware of. And that might help with general education on this.
Mayor, if I may add, I think the education is really key because in my experience, a lot of people don't contact the city and will fill in their park strip areas without asking, and then you have issues. So I think our education efforts on this are going to be critical, as Matt has said.
Agreed. Okay, any further comments, discussions on this subject? What's the next step, Mike or Matt?
I think our preferred step now is we'll distribute the same draft to the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Committee, take it there to that meeting in May. This will probably, again, our plan is to bring this back to the council in June for formal public comment and final consideration after we have a recommendation from that committee.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? Okay, moving on. Next item on our agenda is on staff reports, item B. It's the state legislature active transportation funding subject. And I know this was on a short time frame. So Mike, are you going to present that item?
Sure, happy to.
Tim Tingy, yeah.
Yep, happy to provide a quick overview of what this is. I just wanted to make sure the council was aware of this. Last week, I think late Wednesday, right at the end of the day Wednesday, we were contacted by the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation, which is within the Governor's Office of Economic Development. They requested that we prioritize, or they requested a quick meeting. So we had that meeting Thursday morning, and at that meeting they stated that the state legislature was still exploring the idea of some sort of bond for active transportation projects in an effort to promote recreation, improve state recreational facilities that have been really busy during this pandemic, but also to create different construction and engineering jobs to keep people working. With that request, they identified Cottonwood Heights as a city that'd be good to have a proposed project in their list of projects. And this is a statewide list. So they asked that we select our priority project to submit to them, that they would then pass along to the state legislature as the legislature begins to discuss this, the concept of a bond for active transportation. There were a few prerequisites for this, for these projects. One is that they're looking for fairly large projects, so projects valued over $500,000. Kind of the higher the better, it seemed like. And two is that they're essentially shovel ready, or that there could be shovels in the ground within 12 months of funding. So I think we had provided a kind of a preliminary list prior to this meeting last week of just various active transportation projects that we kind of had in the pipeline. But with those two criteria that they were looking for, the list narrowed down pretty naturally. Most of our projects are either a little ways out or valued under $500,000. However, the one that is not, that could meet both of these criteria is the Bonneville Shoreline, Ferguson Canyon overflow parking, the trailhead, the dog park, and then the beginning construction of some of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail up in the Ferguson Canyon area. In that call, I asked the staff member with the Office of Outdoor Recreation if we could take this to our council, give our open space committee the weekend to review and submit their recommendations just via email. They said no. We essentially had to turn around and submit our preferred project and some project details the next day. So we met Thursday. They wanted the information Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. I did have a phone call with the chair of the Open Space Committee, shared this information with her. And then the Office of Outdoor Recreation said if this has some traction, that they'll certainly be back for more details. So there will be opportunities to continue discussing this. So with that background, we submitted just a project summary sheet. I'll just pull it up quick so I can show you.
I think it's in our packets too, yeah.
Yeah, it should be. Can you see this now?
Half of it. There it is. Yep.
Okay. So this is the sheet we submitted. Again, you're all familiar with the project, but it's that same project that we have been talking about. We've applied for outdoor recreation grant money to help fund as well. And now we continue our conversation with the CMAQ money to be used here. We estimated the total project cost at 1.5 million. That's a little more than the estimated project cost for the park and the parking itself, but that's because we added construction of a portion of the actual Bonneville Shoreline Trail up in the Ferguson Canyon area. There's a big parcel of land that's owned by Salt Lake County that I feel that we could partner with them on and probably see some trail construction happen pretty quickly there. So we added a little bit of money to cover that portion of this project. The Office of Outdoor Recreation asked us to submit a total project cost, but also a requested amount, and that we don't request the full amount to be funded. We requested between 800,000 and 1 million. I have gotten confirmation that they put 800,000 down for our request. They weren't comfortable putting a higher amount down. And then they asked for some general information on start date. We feel that if this is awarded, project engineering is planning to commence regardless of this funding. And that project construction can begin within 9 to 10 months of funding. So that would be within the 12 months they're looking for. And then they're looking for jobs created. That's a big part of this. And that's through engineering, through surveying, through construction, really the process of building this out. And we estimated about 25 to 30 jobs when that's all said and done. They prefer that the jobs are not state employees or local government employees. That's not a deal breaker if they are. But we stated that, the standard process here is we would contract this work out. So that would not be state or local employees. These would all be contracts with private construction companies or engineers or surveyors. So this is an overview, and Tim and I thought it was important for us to provide the context of why this happened so quickly, why it wasn't first discussed with the council. We pushed for that. We would have loved to have had more discussion and feedback, but given the parameters and that this is really the only project that we feel could meet the 2 criteria they were looking for, we felt confident enough to submit this, and then just wanted to bring it to the council's attention to answer any questions or just provide this information for you.
Quick question to Tim or Mike. Have we had any feedback from our lobbyists with respect to the feasibility of this fund actually coming to fruition?
I've had conversations with both of our lobbyists, especially Greg Curtis. He was going to get more information on where he thought it would be. He was reaching out to some of the legislators about it. It will be going probably forward on the next discussion that they have, but he was going to look into it, but has not provided any detail at this point.
Okay. Yeah. I know. Somebody have a comment? Christine?
I have a question. So in a perfect world, we would get $800,000 for this. And perhaps we can retain some of the Wasatch Front Regional Council money. Between those 2 amounts, would that adequately fund this project? Or more than fund it, or we still need more money to fund it to completion? Understanding that we don't have a full design and engineer drawing yet, but just magnitude-wise.
So Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. I think if we were to obtain the CMAQ funding as well as 800,000 for this, it would fund the Ferguson trail and park area fully, and then there may even be some to construct portions of the BST depending upon the amounts. But yes, I think it would provide enough money to do this whole project as well as possibly some of the BST construction, additional BST construction. Is that what you think?
Then we may want to look at, if we're doing that, as what it might cost to complete the trail to one canyon or the other, so there could be a possible loop made, and just see if we're anywhere in the ballpark of moving towards that goal.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. The other kind of wrinkle there is to connect the whole loop, we're dealing with private property. We're kind of steering clear of that with this request. We're trying to work on, the trails that we have on public property. The full cost of the trail is more. That would probably be in the, with working through those private property challenges, 2 million plus to get the whole trail done. But yeah, to answer hopefully both of your questions, we do feel if we had $1 million plus 800,000, that would be enough, and probably some additional money to fully build this project and put a good start into the actual trail construction.
Did you say about you're kind of guesstimating $2 million to complete one or the other, or the full canyon to canyon?
Yeah, I'm talking canyon to canyon with the trail. The construction of an actual trail isn't necessarily astronomically expensive, but we've got to work through the private property issues there, and that's where the cost variables come in.
Right, it's easements and legal work and permission and.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's critical, because we're using a lot of estimates, as we move forward with the Ferguson Canyon overflow and off-leash area, is to get some engineering cost and preliminary design costs and stuff, so we can start to get a good handle on the projected budget, especially if it's with the congestion mitigation money, with the federal requirements. It's going to be more expensive, so that we don't have any surprises as we get into it. What type of fencing do we want, what type of amenities we want in it, all those things. So hopefully going forward next few months, we can get some conceptual pieces of design done to better understand how that'll look.
Yeah, thanks. So as part of our grant application to the Office of Outdoor Recreation, we had to provide an itemized budget. So it's not, fully detailed out budget. There are some variables there, but it is a line item budget for this, and engineering costs and contingencies are built into that. I believe at 10% each. And they are factored into this total project cost estimate. So there are variables, like you said, Mayor, the fencing, revegetating the park or the ground treatment there, retaining walls and engineering for those are some unknowns at this point. But we do feel we have our head pretty well wrapped around a lot of the budget costs that include that engineering and site prep and design work.
It's
Hey, Mike.
exciting. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. In your research on different dog parks, have you ever seen one that included an outdoor dog bath, like a washing area?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway from our research is dog parks come in about as many shapes and sizes as dogs do. So we've kind of seen, which I think is encouraging, is we can essentially be creative and tailor a design to the site, and certainly an amenity like that is something we can look into.
Cool.
Another item to be considered when we look at the parking side of this is that when we talk about active transportation, it's not just vehicles. So I would want to throw out there and have on the record that we have a lot of bikes that are heading from different parts of the valley to this site. And so there needs to be some type of a bike racking system where bikes can be secured, where they can ride a bike to here, park it, secure it, and then hike up the canyon. So it's not just parking for vehicles. So taking, I don't know how many stalls that would be, but I think that would be an important component. That's the example of things as we get into it more, we start looking at those types of things, and they'll have some variables to the costs.
And Mayor, if they had a on that south end out of Bengal, and is it Honeycomb Hill? Is that the name of that road that comes down from Top of the World? There's that potential stairway going up, but if there was a place where you could stash your bikes or keep them protected and then just head straight up there to the canyon or the trail, that would be very nice and probably not take a lot of space.
Yeah, something formal. I mean, we'll let the experts tell us how to do it and stuff like that, but that'd be an important, unique component. Yeah.
Right, direct access off of Bengal and off of that egress from the entire Top of the World area would be kind of nice.
Anyway, we won't get into all that, but again, appreciate the staff's initiative and pulling us together and being sensitive to call Melissa from Parks and Open Space Committee and bringing us back to us for some input. This is it's glad to see some things moving. We've got some momentum. We just need to keep it and bring it to fruition here as we move forward.
Mayor, may I just add that I really appreciate the collaborative work that Public Works and Community Economic Development have done on this. With Matt and Adam doing preliminary design work, it really helped us in our numbers for what we're putting together on line items, and then Mike and his group. It's been a good collaborative effort, and we're coming a long ways on this, I think, with getting some of the potential funding. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Sorry, I might just
go ahead.
2 comments. One comment is, Mayor, I thought in our last council meeting, we included in our budget was potentially that some of the funds for some of this preliminary engineering or more detailed engineering for the site. Is that what I heard? Is that what we chatted about?
Well,
I thought that's what we said.
I think if let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. In the tentative budget, there's $220,000 allocated in the current capital fund. Plus we took $220,000 from BST funds for 450 or something like that. That was as a placeholder subject to looking for any other funding, okay? So I would assume, if I understood it correctly, if the CMAQ money comes through, we would talk as a council and say, do we want to repurpose that or leave it in? Is that, am I hitting the subject correctly?
We also had $125,000 that was the match for those funds that was currently budgets. It's not going to be utilized. That could be used for continuing with the project that eventually would go to any match that we would have to.
Well, the point was we wanted to come up with the 500 and some thousand that the ILA required, and so it was those 3 pieces, right? But again, it was a placeholder with a commitment to try and do all we could to get the CMAQ funds, to not take the BST money and have it to do projects. Now, even with that being said, even if it stayed as the current tentative budget, there's still, I think, Scott George, you can correct me, there's still about 400,000 available for BST, even if that piece stayed with the current budget.
I think Scott was correct on that number, 125. We were going to move ahead with design and engineering.
Yeah, that we had that money is in place right now in the existing budget.
Yeah.
It's available to look at design, and I think we talked about that to answer Councilmember Michael's inquiry on that. We talked about that. Money
I think that's important to proceed with that. I really do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that my memory.
Yeah, if we were able to get enough from the legislature and or CMAQ to do the trailhead area and connect that to Wasatch, Bengal, and the others, then that would leave that 600 or 1,000 that we had still in the Bonneville shoreline money from the county to where we could, that might just be enough to connect one canyon or the other. That would be great.
Well, if we could get personal property owners to facilitate us, yeah.
And I guess my parting thought on this conversation is I sent an email or text to both the mayor and the city manager this weekend as I drove by the overflow parking at Ferguson. I didn't count the number of cars, but there were cars all in the dirt area where we're considering the parking to be located and along the street. And then as I drove up, there were even more cars on the road, not even yet close to the trailhead. So I guess my comment, being the District 4 representative and representative of the folks who are impacted by overflow parking, it's if we can get this win, it would be really great for many of those residents who live there and who struggle with parking.
I think it's obvious one of our high priorities, along with a few others, but it's right there at the top. And so if Matt, Ship, if you can get that money, I'll take you to lunch. Yeah.
Christine, I've got a quick question for you. What's the general consensus in the area up in your district where that trail, Bonneville Shoreline Trail, will go? Are they nervous or are they welcoming for the most part as far as litigation and land issues when we do go forward with that trail all the way through?
I see Mike smiling. Maybe I'll let you take a first stab at it because I think we've both been witness firsthand to some of the answers.
Well, I'll just say we had a Bonneville Shoreline Trail. We're working on an access plan for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. We had an open house as part of that. In general, the consensus we hear is, you know, and we were talking about trailheads at these open houses, but a lot of people want the trailheads there, and then the few that don't want a trailhead in a specific location conveniently happen to live in that location. So I think you deal with that issue. There are some property owners up there. I think there are a couple that years ago had easements established to allow for the trail connection. And there are others that, you know, that at this point kind of just say no way. It varies. And I think it's going to require close conversation and coordination with all of those property owners individually.
Mike, do you remember offhand how many landowners there are along the route? I don't know why 13 rings a bell, but maybe it's fewer than that.
It's less than that.
Is it 9?
Yeah, it's probably, I would say, I'll say 10 to 13. I don't know.
Also, when we talk about public input, and we're referring to that, even when we get to the off-leash area, along with Ferguson Canyon overflow, we'll still need to be taking public comment on that. And though the majority of the residents, I believe, in the city are going to applaud the effort, there's someone who's still going to be near that that's going to probably be opposed. But I think, unlike any other site, there's better buffering here than anywhere. So, because when we had the public hearing or public comments on the swamp lot, we have some residents who were very concerned, which is nearby there.
You know that, I mean, and that's understandable. Mayor, you remember from your time on the community council with my wife that a lot of the sentiment the time prior incorporation was that was proposed to be a couple of office buildings with access and like that. And
yeah,
those, many of the people in there, their comments were basically anything but that, please, just not that office building, please. You know, there'll be obviously newer people that have come in the last 15 years, but I think rather than what that was originally looked to be by Mr. Walker, this is a vast improvement.
Yep, I agree. Oh, I'm excited for it. I think, you know, like any development that we would propose that's related to parks and open space, we have a great story to tell. And if you look at our surveys, I think it's very supportive. So we're excited. Any further comments on that subject?
After all the squabbling Christine and I have done over this particular property and what to do with it, it's exciting to see that there may be some real, very serious progress being made. That's, you know, that if that takes a little squabble, I'm all for it.
Yep, it's exciting. All right, any further discussion on that subject? We'll keep you informed either in individual meetings with Tim or with communication through emails and stuff. But also on the other end of that, with the Spain property, the $500,000 that's coming from the county, we're still working on that. It should be on the council agenda a week from today, I think. We've been providing a lot of information from Mike Johnson and myself and Tim and others who have been working through different means to educate the council. But you know, last night CWC, the subject came up, and there was a lot of support for our efforts as well as the efforts of others to acquire that property for a trailhead, which is one of another connecting points from Ferguson Canyon Trail. So a lot of progress, but still a lot of work to be done. So it'll be exciting to see some things finalized here in the next 6 months or a year, along with other things we're doing in the city. Okay, we've got just a couple minutes, so I'll give you a 10-minute break. So let's kind of wrap things up. The only calendaring item is as tentative, and that is the Butlerville days, and we'll leave that on there for a couple more weeks as we finalize the budget. But right now, indication from everyone we talked to throughout the valley is everything is canceled in our budget right now. Implies that'll be canceled. So even though it's tentative on your budget, or pending, I should say, it'll right now the intent, as I understand, that it will be canceled for this year.
The Days of 47 announced cancellation of most of their things. It's very sad, but it's kind of the world we're in the summer, it looks like.
Yep. Yeah, just hopefully things are pulled together by September so I can go to football games, but we'll see.
I like your suggestion to take a short break. If that's okay, I'd move that we adjourn the work session and reconvene the business meeting in 10 minutes.
Do you have a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Bracken and seconded by Councilmember Bruce. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, we'll see you at 7 o'clock back on Zoom. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.